Hello and welcome to The Briefing, a weekly conversation with leaders and experts to explore the ideas shaping our democracy today. I'm Michael Waldman, president of the Brennan Center. Over the last year or two really big issues have emerged at the center of our politics. First, we're seeing, as we have discussed, a concerted drive to undermine the elections in 2026 and beyond. Just this past week, the House of Representatives passed the SAVE Act, what we think is an egregious voter restriction bill that would make it impossible for millions of Americans to vote. And it's happening with so much else. The FBI raid on the Fulton County election office in Georgia, demands of states for data, and much more. That's one of the things that we're seeing right now as this issue has exploded. The other is the continued understanding we have deeper and deeper of the corruption that has engulfed our government, emanating especially from the Oval Office. It goes deeper than that. We see right now a fusion of private wealth and public power that we have just not seen in our country, I think, since the Gilded Age. These are really big issues for our country. And we are very fortunate to have with us one of the people who will help us understand the response that can happen. Because as we all know, it's after scandal that you can have reform. It doesn't always happen, but we need political leadership and citizen activism to make it happen. We have with us today Congressman Joe Morelle. He is the ranking Democrat on the House Administration Committee, which is the key committee on so many of these issues. He has been asked to be the point person, the leader on these issues by the House Democratic leadership. He is playing an extraordinarily important and effective role right now on a lot of these things, and we're really thrilled to have the chance to talk to him to understand what he is up to, what Congress can do, and what we as citizens should do. So, Congressman Morelle, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You are, in fact, playing a really critical role, and we want to unpack that. I think it would be helpful for our viewers to know a little bit about you and how did you get into public service? How did you end up doing what you're doing?
It's a great question. Thanks. I remember as a kid sitting around the kitchen table. I was the oldest of five. My father was a pipe fitter who didn't graduate from high school. My mom worked in the home raising five children and had an oldest who was pretty rambunctious. But so we would talk a lot about, government. My father cared deeply about the union movement. He was a member of the local 13 pipe fitters and steam fitters union. But no one had ever really been in politics. And I interned when I was a freshman, a sophomore, must have been, at State University College of New York at Geneseo, small liberal arts college.
Upstate New York.
Yep, south of Rochester, where I grew up. And I wasn't really good at school, which is sad looking back because I love learning and I love engaging in conversations about all manner of things, but I wasn't particularly good. I bounced in and out, but I did take an internship, which I really enjoyed. And then I dropped out of school, dropped back in. It was not what you would call the way they draw it up on the chalkboard.
This is not what ChatGPT would say is the path to elective office.
So I was gonna go back for what would have been the start of my junior year, and I had a baseball accident. I broke my leg in 5 or 6 places. And this is the days before they'd screw you back together. So I was out of school. I was out of work. Most of your friends come and visit you when you have an accident. Right. And then after a while, they don't come by as more. I was miserable. I called the state senator that I interned for and said, could I volunteer in your office? I'm literally going mad at my house. And he said, I have a part-time job as doing constituent services. So I said, sign me up. So from there, I worked in his office. In the mornings, I was a janitor at a local school and a church and school, and then I'd go into his office and start learning about it. And then at the age of 24, my county chairman called me in. So we need a candidate to run in the county legislature, which I had no idea what that even was. We really just need your name on the petitions. We'll find the real candidate. So I said, oh, okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll do whatever you want. I'm brand new to politics. And they didn't really work very hard at finding anyone. So I ran. I lost that first election in a pretty heavily Republican district by 60 votes out of about 8,000 cast. And 2 years later, I ran again and won and then got elected to the state legislature. And so I don't want to say I backed into it, but I sort of got, into it in not by going 4 years, getting my degree, getting a master's degree, and knowing that I always wanted to do this. It was kind of just it was more by accident than anything.
But clearly, it was something that
I loved it. I do know that from the from the beginning. I think we all know, particularly if we're doing something we've never done before, you could tell. Do I enjoy this? Do I not enjoy it? And I found, probably because I like to talk, and I like people. And I found the ability, particularly if you're doing constituent work, you find that people come to government feeling, if they're calling your state legislator about any manner of things, they're already frustrated because the system isn't working. They think people aren't going to listen to me. Nobody cares about me. And when you're able to solve problems for them and they really feel like, oh, well, government can work and it works effectively. And I love the idea of solving problems. And so I just knew this is what I wanted to do. And I've been blessed, truly blessed, to be able to do it for many years now.
And one of the goals, and we'll talk about the challenge of making sure that people from a real background, from real life, can actually serve and not just come from money or all the things that people have to do right now to get into office.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think has helped me is those early struggles. I was talking to the president of my community college, brought a student in to visit when I was in Washington just the other day, and he was telling about his challenges, and I immediately identified having had my own and sort of struggling to try to figure out, how this works. And I do think we sometimes forget that even though, we sort of have this theory that people go to school, and they go to college for 4 years and they get a job or they go on to get a law degree or an engineering degree and their life goes on and they're successful. Boy, we forget about how sort of challenging life is and how many things can get in your way that you didn't anticipate, whether it's sickness or whether it's just circumstances, a bad economy. So it's just good to remember that, our job is to step in and help people and, to your point, to encourage people from all backgrounds. I mean, the body that I'm privileged to serve in is called the House of Representatives. People call us, congressmen, congresswomen, but it's representative. We represent, and so the Congress should represent all of America. And so having people from different backgrounds, I think, is vital for us to be able to really serve the American people the way we're supposed to.
And the framers of the Constitution, and I want to talk about what's been going on in the House this past week.
Yeah.
The framers really felt that Congress was to be the preeminent branch and that the House of Representatives, precisely because it was the one that was actually elected by the widest electorate, was supposed to be preeminent. And part of the challenge is when people are trying to deny the right to vote, that, in my view, goes straight at this basic kind of constitutional premise.
Question. It's sort of interesting you say that because many people forget that the framers, the House of Representatives is really the only of the three that you sort of think about in terms of elections, the House, the Senate, and the presidency, the only one directly elected, at least at the time of the right? I mean, the United States Senate were chosen by state legislators, and the president by the Electoral College. So you're right. They thought a lot about it. They had, a great deal of debate that went on in Philadelphia, and then subsequent to that in the ratification. And this was really, really important. And the great thing, I know the framers, understandably, because of slavery and 3/5 and, how many people criticize what happened in that space and the great compromises. But the one thing they don't get acknowledged enough for, what you're touching on, is this is the first time on any level in the history of the world on 13 colonies, the 13 states. That's a big geographic area, a lot of people, even for its time. First time ever that they said, we're going to let people decide.
Right.
It's really an extraordinary...
Not a little city-state.
Right, exactly.
They put the census into the Constitution so they could count people for House of Representatives apportionment and all the problems. But there was really radically small d democratic stuff.
No question.
All of which makes the attempt to restrict the vote.
Yeah.
So why don't we...
Yeah, and I will tell you, I'm sure you've read this. I just picked up, and I'm about a third of the way through, Akir Reed Amar's biography of the Constitution, and remembering all these discussions about how to make this the broadest. How do we let more people rather than fewer? No property restrictions on running for office or qualifications.
No religious test.
No religious test.
They knew exactly what they were doing, and you and I have talked. Part of the upside of the long commutes and time away from home is you get to read.
Yes.
And I'm blown away by how much you are able to do.
I have a goal every day of reading for a half hour of things that are not on my desk memos. I mean, reading.
So looking at the videos on my phone doesn't count, right? That's
well, people say to me, if you watch a video, does that count? I go, no, that's not reading. It's watching. It's good. I'm not suggesting it's not.
All authors everywhere.
I'm a big on. I'm still big on the written word and reading it.
So the SAVE Act, which passed the House this past week, the folks who follow this podcast have heard about it.
Sure.
But it's an egregious, we think, voter suppression bill. It would effectively require people to produce a passport or a birth certificate to be able to register. And one of the questions is, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. So the SAVE Act passed once before. Now it's the Save America Act, which in many ways has gotten more draconian and more dangerous. But yeah, what's wrong with it? Well, first off, I remind my Republican colleagues, you have a right to be able to vote. This isn't something that you have to pass several tests. They did that before in the 1940s and 1950s, and they hate when we say it's Jim Crow 2.0. But putting tests in front of people who have a God-given, inalienable right to vote if you're an American citizen, that you shouldn't have to go very far. So you're right. What they do is they put now documentary proof of citizenship.
Which sounds
great, right? Well, why shouldn't you have to prove you're a citizen? And that would be, some people might argue. I say to them every time they say, well, you should have to be a citizen to vote. And I'm like, you do have to be a citizen to vote. It's the law already.
Many times over.
Many times over. And you have no proof that anybody...
And only citizens basically do vote. And we like to point out, I don't know if you saw this, but in Louisiana, which is a Republican Secretary of State, and Louisiana, of course, has a rather fragrant history on political chicanery. Yes. The Republican Secretary of State, I think trying to help out their cause on this stuff, did a big study of the voter rolls and stood there with all these MAGA people on either side and said, we've done a big study and we found, I'm going to get the number maybe wrong, I think 79 people in the last 40 years who were non-citizens who we think voted out of the tens of millions of people. So I guess she sort of was sheepish and said, I think it's actually not a big problem. And the same thing happened in Utah. And we know that that's true all over the country. So
I was in front of the Rules Committee the other day before this got to the floor. You have to go through the Rules Committee. And one of the Republican members asked me, how many illegal, undocumented illegals, that's what the phrase they like to call human beings. Anyway, how many voting is too many for you? And I said, I don't think anyone who's not an American citizen should vote in a federal election because that's the law. And then my colleague, Brian Stiles, the chairman of the committee, said, one person voting illegal is too many. It crosses out and cancels an American citizen. And I respond by saying 80 million voter-eligible United States citizens did not participate in the presidential election in 2024. 80 million. Don't you think that's a problem we ought to be focused on? How to get everybody who has a right to participate? Wouldn't that make our democracy better? But they don't answer that. And then I say, oh, by the way, how many American citizens denied the opportunity to vote because they don't have all the documentation? What about them isn't that as important? Isn't that more egregious?
As you know, half of all Americans, for example, don't have a passport.
Right.
How do they summer in France if they don't have a passport? But they don't have a passport.
Right.
Brennan Center research shows that 21 million people at least lack ready access to those documents, and that doesn't even count the married women.
And by the way, we noted the Brennan Center had done that study on the floor the other day. Yes. We try to promote the Brennan Center. Yeah.
This bill passed the House last time.
Yes.
In the same a version of it, and now they're coming back with it.
And with a worse version. But the other thing too, so you mentioned people not having passports and having to pay $130 to get one. You could bring your birth certificate if you have it and if you can locate it. A lot of people cannot, so you'd have to write to your health department and be able to pay for, a raised seal. But if you're a married woman, my wife's name when she was born was Mary Beth Bauer. She's now Mary Beth Morelle. Whatever people think of the tradition of changing your last name when you're married, it still happens quite a bit in America. If you have a photo ID and a birth certificate that have different names, you now have to demonstrate some proof that you're the same person. So, marriage certificate, or you can sign an affidavit. But think of all that. And then you have to go through. I had to go get my real ID in New York to be able to drive. So I get the enhanced, which I got all my stuff together, made an appointment with my county clerk, spent a couple hours. I get there, and they said, "Where's your Social Security card?" I go, "Social Security card?" They go, "Yeah, you can't do. Yeah, you got to have your Social Security card, not just the number, the card." I didn't have it, and then I went home and realized, although I'm usually very good about this, I could not find it. I had to write to Social Security. I get the card. I had to go back, and this is something I needed: my driver's license to get on a plane to fly to Washington. And I think if I was registering to vote, I might say, "Well, the hell with all this. I guess they don't want me to vote." So that's part of it. It's now you're going to have, and by the way, no more mail-in registration. You have to go to the Board of Elections. Mm-hmm. I noted that for rural Americans, sometimes where you register your local Board of Elections could be as far as 200 miles away in some places. In some states, rural community. In Alaska, you might have to fly to a place where your Board of Elections is. And this is all for you to be able to register to vote. It's insane. But the other thing they did, I do want to make sure I don't forget this, is that this new version now requires every state to submit all of its voter file data to the Department of Homeland Security. Think about that right now. In this moment, that's what I said on the floor. What could go wrong? We're going to give Kristi Noem and the people who run ICE, we're now going to give them every bit of information that you submit when you register to vote. I said to the Republicans, why don't you go up and down your street right now, knock on doors, and just ask how many people are happy with their voter information being in the hands of ICE right now?
Well, it's an interesting thing because the atmospherics, in a way, ought to have changed. This is coming at a time when people are really upset about what they're seeing as abuse of power by the government. They want strong immigration laws, but they don't want what they're seeing in Minneapolis, and this is only the beginning.
Yeah.
And
I think they feel, if I can, and I hate to interrupt you, but
no, please.
I feel like they realize they've been lied to. And the president said with certainty, as though he knew where these people were, we're going after the murderers and rapists, right? That's what everybody
the worst
was
of
going,
the worst.
The worst of the worst. How many times did we hear that? And they're detaining American citizens now. They're going out without judicial warrants. They're just roaming the streets looking for people and detaining them. To your point, what could go wrong? So I think when our people are realizing what this is now, they feel like they've been lied to. The last thing I think they would want is for people to have more information, the Department of Homeland Security have more information about them.
And as you know, this is all the legislative version of what the administration has been trying to do to undermine the election. And this is the first time in American history, really, that the federal government has been the force trying to undermine elections. We've had, usually when the federal government has gotten involved before, Voting Rights Act, other things of that nature, it's been to stop states from abusing the rights of their own people. Now it's this active force. And, we've been saying this for months. You've been saying this for months. People might sometimes go, really? Are you exaggerating? Now they're saying it out loud. And it's this demand for data is something the Justice Department is doing. We counted 48 states that have had demands by the Justice Department. They've begun to sue these states. 3 courts so far have rejected this from the federal government, from the Justice Department. And we know that part of what they're going to do is use it to say, see, we have the proof that there must be something wrong. And they're demanding that states purge voters who will be, in many instances, eligible voters off the rolls. And
no question.
It's something we're all focused on between now and November.
I read an article today about how many, it involved Board of Elections in the state of Missouri, where the local election official were looking at the lists of people who had been purged or it was suggested that these people weren't actually U.S. citizens. And she looked at it and she said, that's one of my top election officials. She initialed someone who wasn't, and they started to go through the list and found out that the list from the Department of Homeland Security was wrong. There were a number of people who were U.S. citizens who they were told to take off because they were not citizens. And this is just the beginning. Who knows how many tens of thousands, if not more, of American citizens may be denied the right because the Department of Homeland Security is determined for however reasons, whether just pure incompetence, which I never underestimate the Trump administration's incompetence, or for darker reasons, just taking people off the rolls.
And it comes when the fact is that actually elections are safe and secure. Election officials from both parties are unsung heroes. These are not glamour jobs. They've been doing this, and despite the pandemic and everything that's happened since, the elections have actually been well run and safe and secure. And so to undermine public confidence in that is its own scandal.
It is, and I marvel because that's how they start every hearing in committee, no matter whether it's the new MEGA Act or the SAVE Act or whatever they talk about elections. Americans' confidence in elections is an all-time low. There's only two problems with it. One, it's wrong. Just statistically, that's not true. And secondly, they're the ones who are undermining the confidence in American elections by continuing to tell people that they're not safe and that they're not secure and they're not accurate. And I want to underscore your point, which is so important, which local election officials in this country, I don't care if they're Republicans or Democrats, they care deeply about what they do. They do it with a high degree of professionalism. And they're there to call the balls and strikes. They're not there to put their finger on the scale, to mix metaphors. And it is just and frankly are often now, particularly Republicans, targets of intimidation, targets of threats. We saw the president famously calling into Georgia to look for 11,000 more votes. Those are all types and forms of intimidation.
Brad Raffensperger, a Republican Secretary of State,
right,
who at a key moment, and we've had our differences with him, he stood up and did the right thing.
He did.
In a way that I wish that I had knew that if I was tested that way at a key moment, it would come out that way. This bill passed the House with only basically a party line vote. One Democrat voted for it, actually stronger opposition than before. And now it's headed to the Senate, where Senator Schumer has said it's dead on arrival. What do you say to your colleagues across the Capitol of what they need to do?
Well, first of all, I always have faith in Chuck Schumer, and I wouldn't want that faith to waver right now. I hope he's 100% right. I'm a little nervous. I think John Thune, I hope, is going to be really thoughtful about this. Senator Murkowski has come out and said she doesn't think this is a good idea. She thinks this is an overreach. I think they're not likely to do it, but I think it's I don't think there's a zero chance. I think it's a non-zero chance.
Never relax on something as central as this, and as central to President Trump's,
Yeah, and the interesting tell on this about what Trump's really up to and the Republicans are really up to is the effective date of this was supposed to be 2027. It was 2027. And the night before, the Rules Committee, which was the day before the bill was passed, they changed it to effective date of 2026. Effective date immediately, which is 2026. But effective date immediately means if the Senate passed it next week and the president signed it, there are 5 states that have elections in March.
Right.
Mississippi, North Carolina, Texas. I mean,
instant chaos in our elections, which is
you'd have to stop people from registering online or by mail. You'd have to now start insisting that your clerks, wherever they are, boards of elections, would know what kind of documentary proof of citizenship is allowable. Is a passport that's a month expired, does that still prove who you are? It would be pure chaos, which just tells you that this isn't about non-citizens voting.
So I want to talk about what comes next after moments like this. As we said, reform doesn't always come after scandal, but that's when it comes. And there is, in the corruption that we see in the government, something really quite extraordinary. Obviously, there's been a lot of corruption in human nature going back forever. if you think about in the 1800s, there was a lot of graft, and then in the 20th century, the campaign finance system got out of control. Now we're basically seeing the worst of these issues roaring back and coming together. And you've been asked by the leaders of the Democratic caucus to take the lead on helping bring together people to talk about this corruption and what can be done about it. Why is that such an important issue for you and your colleagues?
Well, it's a great lead-in because I think this is so important. I think two things are happening at the same time, and so this is a real moment. I think the first is, you see this all the time statistically in polling data. The how Americans are losing faith in their government, and look, to some degree, that's not Donald Trump. That in part maybe the reason Donald Trump was elected. People are just losing faith. They wanted somebody different. They wanted to get somebody different, but. And I think that's tragic. I mean, as we were talking about it, this is really government of the people. And so if people lose faith, what do we have in a democracy? So that's a problem that I think Hakeem Jeffries and I and so many others want to address. The second is the deep corruption that exists in this government. I mean, how do people not get the sense that almost everything Donald Trump does in the White House is viewed through the prism of how this helps him personally?
That's one of the things that's so different, right?
Yeah.
Is that according to Forbes magazine, his family business has increased its wealth by $3 billion over the last year, very often leveraging policies that he's done. And with his crypto operation and other things, it just becomes all that much more easy for someone who wants to influence them to grease some palms, in effect, to make it happen.
I don't.
Do people think that's normal? Do you think voters see how unusual that is, or do they just think? Because one of the challenges, and we've talked about this, is that people look at politicians, they look at both parties, they look at the Democrats, and they don't say, "Oh, obviously the Democrats are better. Donald Trump's worse." Trump said he was going to clean the swamp, and he spoke to these issues. Right. What do Democrats, or what do people in Congress? I always want to note that we're dealing with this at the Brennan Center from a nonpartisan perspective. People in public office, what do they need to do to gain the trust that they're actually taking the corruption issue seriously? What kind of changes need to be made?
Well, I'll tell you what, I agree with you too, and I think there's just a general view, if you're in Congress, that you're self-dealing, that you go as a good person, they like you, and you get there and almost the system beats you down and you realize, oh, I should make money off of this. It's not true, but I think that's a great fear. And so in this moment, in my mind, we need to basically focus on four different things in this effort. One is to reform the electoral system. What the Brennan Center has been advocating for so many years, and such an incredible leader in this space, but really give people some confidence that their votes matter, that they are participants in this democracy, that is their democracy. So electorally, then I think we have to look at the executive branch, the emoluments clause of the Constitution, which seems kind of quaint. Even when you talk about the president getting a Qatari jet for his personal use, people go, oh, yeah, that was kind of old hat. Now he's making billions in crypto with digital assets.
$500 million the week before he took office.
I mean, it's just so blatant. I think we have to look at the Supreme Court. No real code of ethics. I think people are very frustrated with the court for obvious reasons. Some of the decisions they've made in the last decade have just been among the worst in American history.
And you've been a supporter of term limits for Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a constitutional challenge in how to deal with the provision in the Constitution around judges, but I think we can do it. I think there's a path forward.
The most noteworthy thing is much more than people realize. That reform is widely popular across the political spectrum. There was a Fox News poll that showed 78% support, which means obviously a lot of Republicans and independents as well as Democrats.
Look, I think some people just like term limits, so for any branch of government. But I do think 18 years, which is what's often talked about, I think it's plenty of time to leave your mark on the American, public and American life.
So there's the executive branch, there's the electoral,
judicial branch, and the Congress. I mean, one of the things that we're working on has gotten a lot of attention recently has been individual members of Congress owning individual stock, trading stock. People sort of confuse a little bit with inside trading, which is against the law for anyone, including members of Congress. But the kind of information that members of Congress get isn't sort of, as you would define it in law right now, inside information, in that you know a lot about the company, but you know things in advance to the American public about, we're going to buy battleships, or we're going to build new planes, or we're going to send someone to the moon. So that gives you a significant insight. Or you know what's going to happen on tariff policy, and then you go and you act on it. That's deeply, deeply, deeply troubling.
People really care about this. And do you think this is something where there'll be a kind of a competition between the parties to do this?
Well, the Republicans have signaled now that they're not going to do it. What they're going to do, they've got this. This is the interesting thing in Congress. Talk about Orwellian. They have a stop trading ban, or so, I don't know exactly what they call it, but it doesn't ban members from trading stock. It's only they would think of this, and Speaker Johnson said he was going to do this and then is backtracked. But it would still allow you, individual members, to own stock. You could hold it, what you come into Congress with. You can sell it. You have to notice, but you can sell it. The current version allows you, if you get dividends, so if you own 10,000 shares of Microsoft and you get dividends, you can take that and buy more Microsoft. You can engage fully in digital assets and crypto. You could allow your spouse, if you're the member of Congress, your spouse can still buy stocks, so let's say for your mom. You have an elderly mom and you're the sole beneficiary. You can buy whatever you want. So we call it the grandma loophole.
She's very grateful.
Yeah, she's very grateful, and she's going to leave it all to you. So I mean, it's just, and this is what they call their big reform. I believe you should be required to sell when you come to Congress. You can get a money market fund, you get a basket of stocks, but you cannot own individual stock. When I got to Washington, I didn't own very much, but some Microsoft and some Google and tech stocks, and I didn't want anyone looking over my shoulder saying, why has Joe Morelle voted like that on AI, or why has he voted? I mean, I didn't want that burden, so I sold everything when I got to Washington, and frankly, I think it was not a burden. I think we could deal with. There's some tax implications which we could deal with, but by and large, I mean, the end of this is what the American people want. They want to know that the things you're voting on and the reasons you're voting, because you care about their interests, not your own financial interests, right? And it should apply not just to members of Congress. It should apply to the president, the vice president, in my view, the cabinet, and the Supreme Court.
Right. And it does not apply to those people.
It doesn't apply to anybody right now. The bill that I'm now trying to get discharged, we're trying to get signatures to discharge it from the House floor, includes all members of Congress and the president and vice president.
And the discharge is a petition that can, even if the people who control the majority party or the committees control and they don't want something to the floor, if you get a majority of the House,
218 members of the House sign then
it goes to the House floor.
Correct. It discharges the committee from its responsibilities and puts the bill right on the floor. So we're close to, I think, about 175 members. So we're getting close.
Some broken arms there, I think.
I would love to get some Republicans who profess to care about this to do the right thing and sign it. If anyone who's paying attention, watching, listening, knows a member of Congress, please check in and urge them to sign the discharge petition.
I want to briefly talk about the politics of all this, because it's really striking. To address these kinds of issues is going to ask members of Congress to take on the system in some ways by which they got there. I mean, we all live now in this world after Citizens United 25 years ago of massive amounts of money. There's dark money, and one way or the other, the folks who were there found their way through that system. Right. Do you think there's a willingness to take this on, this corruption issue, in a way that we haven't seen before?
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time in the last several months meeting with my colleagues, often individually or in small groups, and have said to them, look, this is the broad goal. I've mentioned always the 4 buckets, the basic areas we want to work in. And then there's 3 tests in my mind. One is, does what we're going to do make a real difference in our politics and how people view us? So is it substantive? does the public buy that this is substantive? So you could do the greatest thing, but if the public isn't buying it, doesn't really help restore that level of confidence in American governance that I think we need to have if we're going to have a functioning democracy. And then the third thing is, which is really the tough test, can you get 218 votes and pass it out of the House?
But you were elected in 2018 when actually a lot of people came in with these kinds of ideas in mind because they saw how people were reacting at that point to the government. There may be a similar public reaction and an electoral consequence too, and that creates moments of opportunity. And
I think there's no question. Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's a challenge because the forces of the status quo always look demoralized and defeated, and then they quickly regroup.
Right.
And so it's a political and a leadership challenge when those opportunities come. I've seen it many times over the decades.
You know, you're so right, and I think in this moment, you know, there is a tendency. It's all coming at us so fast every day. The Trump, flooding the zone, so to speak. And so you have two choices. You can get demoralized, lose energy, lose faith, and that's a completely valid human response. Or you say, what are we going to do about this? Because we're not going to let this stand. And I think this effort, this moment is not only energizing members of Congress, I think it's energizing the public. And I go around and talk about this all the time and say this is going to be the most significant governmental reform since Watergate. Now, you and I were talking beforehand. Unfortunately, for some young people, they may not even know really the impact that Watergate had on our politics in the latter half of the 20th century and beyond.
But there was a lot done in response to it that actually built trust back in the government at a time when it was very low. And it was not just abstract good government stuff. It actually made the government work better and ultimately have more trust. And it's going to have to be a moment like that, a reform moment. And one way or the other, and both parties get involved. That when it works well, you get a competition among people to try to be out ahead of the parade, and that is one hopes what
Right.
will happen.
And the way to get there is to build this public interest in it, where the public is pushing you and saying, we need to do this. You need to reform the government. And these are 4, 5, 6, 10 ideas. There's many that would help do that. That would help us have greater confidence that what you are doing is in our interest. And I think when we do that, we'll start to see people on both sides who are having a real conversation about how to get this done. But we're going to lead. We're going to do it. And, so grateful for your leadership and your partnership with Brennan Center. When I got to Albany many years ago, reforming Albany was the Brennan Center agenda, which had enormous impact on the work being done in the state capitol. So we want to make sure that we take that spirit and reform what happens in our nation's capital.
Well, thank you for your
Thank you.
leadership on this. Thank you for doing what you can to seize the moment. Thank you for doing what we all need to do to live up to the promise of America in our 250th anniversary. We always point out that it was 250 years ago that Tom Paine wrote in Common Sense, in America, the law is king. And we're finding out every day whether that's true, and fighting for reform as you are and fighting for the freedom to vote is how we live up to that. That's what we think. Thank you, Congressman Joe Morelle, for being here and for your leadership. And thank you to everybody who's watching. And I will say, as we do, I hope you enjoy this podcast, this conversation about democracy and the rule of law. You can please subscribe on all the platforms where you get podcasts, and give us a good rating if you have a chance. And thanks so very much for watching.